Right, today I'm going to have a little look at the Hinge Rig, and it's a rig that I suppose I've been using for somewhere around 30 years now. It's not a new rig by any means, but for pop-ups it's the rig that I always turn back to. I've tried other rigs in the past, you know, choddies and things like that, and for me they were never as effective. The Hinge Rig is simply the most effective pop-up rig I've ever used, so that's the reason I've been using it for 30 years. Like all rigs, you know, people have different ideas, they'll have different versions, their own sort of personal reasons for doing things. And I used to use like stiff hook length material, stiff mono, for the whole rig, the boom section and the hook section. And over years, well, I suppose I've changed my ideas slightly about that. So starting with the boom section anyway, the first thing you need is 2 ring swivels, a size 8 and size 11. And size 8, the larger one of the two, that's simply the size that fits into most leg clip systems, etc. The other one, the size 11, is obviously a smaller ring swivel, and that's simply just because it's not as big and bulky down at the sort of business end of the rig. I prefer a slightly smaller, less bulky swivel for that part of the rig. Now the actual boom is skin link 20-pound soft version, and yeah, the reason I turned over to that type of boom long time ago now, really, from the stiff section, is that it's very unusual to have just a really flat, clean bottom that you're casting out onto. You know, there's always something out there, there's little bits of weed or twigs or something. So, yeah, I prefer the slightly softer coated braid boom, so that when that does settle down on the bottom, even if it's over a twig or something like that, you know, it just settles a little bit nicer. Length of the boom, well, a little bit more personal. You know, if the bottom's fairly clean and fairly straightforward, it'll be about 6-7 inches, something like that. If I'm fishing over a slightly sort of more choddy bottom or silkweed, something like that, I might extend it, you know, by a couple of inches, 2 or 3 inches, up to about 10 inches. But for the most part, I would say 7 inches is about right. The only thing I would add to that is that the boom section is tied to the ring on both swivels. So both swivels, the boom is tied actually to the ring of the swivel. The actual swivel is the bit that gives all the movement to the hook part of the rig itself. So some people tie it the other way around. They tie it to the swivel and have the hook section tied to the ring. I don't like to do it like that. I prefer to have the hook length section moving around on that swivel freely around the ring, and to me it gives it a lot more free movement. Now for the actual hook length part of the section, starting with the hook itself, I've got a chod claw size 7 on there. I like the size 7 in the claw, and it's something I've gone into before on different rigs, but for some reason the claw size 7, you know, yeah, it's just my preference. Some people will be different, but there we go. I like the chod claw because of the offset eye. I used to use the normal claws which have a straighter eye, but the chod claw has like a slightly offset eye, which makes tying with the stiff mono a lot easier. It makes the hook sit a lot better. Now the hook length material is the Nash Chod Link 20-pound. To attach the hook I just use a simple knotless knot with about 6 or 7 turns. So through the eye from front to back, 6 or 7 turns, back through the eye and pull tight, and then you're left with a tag end. So that tag end has also got to go through the eye of the hook, which makes the D section on the back of the hook. Now before you do that, I place a bait screw, plastic bait screw on the tag end, and I've used different ways of attaching the hook bait itself, from little rings with tying the bait on with floss, and yeah, that's a bit fiddly, and in the middle of the night it's a bit of a pain to do and whatever, but yeah, I find the actual plastic bait screw such a simple way of just attaching the bait, and it attaches it really well. You know, the baits don't come off, you can whack them out and you know, you have a bit of coot problem or whatever, and they tend to stay on pretty well. So yeah, that's my preferred method these days, is actually a little plastic bait screw. So that goes on the tag end, and the end of the tag end goes back through the eye until you get it about right. You form the D that you want, the size that you want. I tend to have it fairly small, and then simply snip off and blob it with a lighter, and what that does is stop it just coming undone. It keeps everything together. So now you've got the hook tied, the D, and the bait screw is on there, so it's just a matter of attaching it to the swivel. Length of the pop-up, how far do you want it off the bottom? It varies with me, you know. I've done it from 1 inch up to sort of 4 or 5 inches. Normally I would say 2 inches. That's sort of pretty standard for me. Over fairly sort of cleanish lake bed, a pop-up about 2 inches off the bottom. Simply attached to the end of the small end of the swivel, the size 11 swivel. It's quite a basic simple knot. It's a half blood knot basically, but only with 2 turns. You just 1, 2 through the loop, snip off and blob it. And because it's so stiff, this material, the blob and the 2 turns is enough to give you a really good secure knot. And any more, it starts getting very complicated with the stiff material. You know, when you try it, you'll see for yourself. You try doing 4 or 5 turns with the stiff material, and it ends up being very springy and very difficult to actually tighten the knot. So yeah, 2 or 3 turns, that's enough, and then just blob it on the end, like I say. And then just put a little curve in it. Sometimes, you know, it just comes with a natural curve off of the spool, but 9 times out of 10 the curve will be offset or whatever. So really you just want a nice, not a big curve. I don't like a big, you know, people talk about a big aggressive curve. I don't like that. I just like a nice little curve running in line with the hook, you know. So when you hold it towards you and you're looking down the line of the hook, the curve goes in line with that. And how I normally do it is really, you can steam it over a kettle or something like that to make it straight, and then just simply mend it with your thumb, and it only takes a couple of little bits like that, and you end up with a nice little curve. And what that does is when the pop-up's sitting on the bottom, that curve just helps it turn around in the water, and you know, when that pop-up goes into the fish's mouth, it just sort of turns, catches in the bottom lip. That curve just helps that. Really, that's near enough the rig. You know, it looks quite a technical rig, but it's really quite a basic, straightforward rig to tie. Only thing to add, pop-up on the bait screw, which is whatever pop-up you choose to use. I'm using Scope-It Squid today, which is nothing unusual, but little Scope-It Squid pop-up on there. And then the final thing is the putty. Now, I've used tungsten putty for ages. I mean, you can get tungsten beads and split shot, whatever. I prefer the putty itself, and where that goes is on the boom, tight up against the ring of the size 11 swivel. So it's on the extreme end of the boom section, not on the hook length section itself. I've seen some people, they actually put the putty on the swivel of the hook section, and I just don't like it like that. I feel like it puts it out of balance. So I'll put it on the end of the boom section, just up against the ring, and then that balances it out nicely. It just goes down, lays on the bottom, and then all of that hook section is free just to waft about in the water. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, it's a rig that I've caught, God, hundreds of carp on over the years, and some big ones too. You know, it's called a big fish rig sometimes, but yeah, what it is for me is just the most effective pop-up rig that I've ever used. And yeah, 30 years on, I'm still using it now. So it's a cracking rig, easy enough to tie up, presents a bait well, and does the job. It catches your fish. So there we go, that's the Hinge Rig.